Hi guys, I'm Rich and today I'll be your pilot for a New York Skyline tour in a Cessna 172 SP Skyhawk. It's 1500 hours or 3 p.m. on a brisk December afternoon and the weather is clear with no winds. Our route today is shown on this sectional map courtesy of the ForeFlight app for the iPad, which mimics the flight route that we will be taking. Our position is shown by the blue dot, and we are approaching runway 25, which is ahead of us, at Central Jersey Regional Airport in Manville, New Jersey. So we'll take off from runway 25, make a climbing right turn to 1,500 feet, and then head in an easterly direction to the New York Harbor. And once we reach a beam of the Verrazzano Bridge, we'll turn northbound and follow the Hudson River on the right shoreline to see the sights of New York. So I hope that's an explanation of what we're doing. And now we will go through the checklist to start up the airplane. So I'll read off the checklist and please follow with me. Instruments off. They are off. Yoke hide. I'll press the Y key and that will hide the yoke for us. Parking brake on. This is the parking brake. Off, on. Master switch on. Fuel check, sufficient. Our tanks are full today. Avionics master switch on. We listen for the whir of the cooling fan. It goes rrr. So we say check and shut off the avionics master switch. Fuel valve pushed in. Fuel selector valve set to both. Okay. At this point we've done a walk around the airplane, taken off all the tethers and the pitot tube cover, and now we can take a look from the outside of the airplane and check the flaps. So we'll apply 10 degrees, 20, and 30. So the flaps are checked. And while we're here, we'll check our control surfaces. We do pitch for the elevators, yaw with a rudder, and roll with the ailerons. And they're all operating freely. So we completed that task. Now we'll check the pitot heat. And when we engage the pitot heat, we'll keep an eye on the ammeter and see if there's a electricity draw on the ammeter. So pitot heat on. Yes, there's a draw. Pitot heat off. So that completes our pre-flight checklist. We shut off the master switch. Now we move on to start the engine. Master switch on. Beacon light on. Throttle open 1/4 of an inch. Mixture full rich. Auxiliary fuel pump on 3 seconds. Auxiliary fuel pump off. We look outside the airplane, open the door, and announce clear prop. And we're going to start the ignition. At the same time, we're going to watch our oil pressure, make sure it comes up. Here's a gauge. We have good oil pressure. Alternator on. Avionics master switch on. Panel light on. Nav lights on. Strobe on. And landing lights on. Okay, we will set the idle to 1000 RPM. Here, an attack. And make sure the flaps are up. They are. Now we do our before taxi checklist. Fuel quantity checked. Flight controls free and correct. We did that. Elevator trim set for takeoff. That's here. Directional gyro align. This is our directional gyro. And we are facing a heading of 340. So we rotate the face of the directional gyro to 340. And we'll have to continue to adjust the directional gyro every 15 minutes because it precesses in flight. Next, we'll check the local ATIS, or Automated Terminal Information System. This airport does not have an automated ATIS. However, the closest airport is Newark, and they of course have one, so we'll listen to that.
Newark Liberty INTL information Charlie. 1900 Zulu weather. Wind calm, visibility more than 10. Sky clear, temperature 13, dew point -16. Altimeter 2992. Arriving runways 11, 22 left, departing runway 22 right. Advise on initial contact you have Charlie.
Okay, so the altimeter setting is 2992. Here's the altimeter, and it's already set for 2992, which is standard pressure, giving us a field elevation of 86 feet, which is correct. So that's a check there. Next, we will set our radios. Now, this is the Garmin G530 that was originally installed in the aircraft, and here's another one, a G430, but how they have been upgraded in the simulator to a GTN Garmin 750. So this faceplate is actually replacing the information in this faceplate. You'll excuse me for that. We need to enter a flight plan. So I will press menu, catalog, and the flight plan we will select is from 47N to Teterboro. We'll activate it and check that our first segment is from 47N to a waypoint called Elve. So that's correct. We click on the message which popped up, provided for entertainment use only. Thank you. We go back and display our map, which shows the magenta line for our first segment, which matches the magenta line shown on ForeFlight. So we're good. The local airport CTAF is 122.7, which we have on display. When we enter the New York Skyline route area, we will need to self-announce our position on a frequency of 123.05. So I will set 123.05 in the standby position of radio 1 and flip it over as we approach. Okay, so the radio is set. We set comms 1 and 2. Okay, so we, as I said, will fly to New York Harbor and fly up the Hudson River. We will deviate from this flight plan, and instead of going east, we'll stay on the eastern shore of the Hudson River and then pick up this segment of the flight plan from Dees to Nyack, and Nyack turn more or less south, and then we will capture the ILS, or Instrument Landing System, approach for runway 19er at Teterboro Airport. So it'll take us in, following the localizer left or right and the glide slope up and down. So we need to set our GPS to receive the ILS for runway 19er in Teterboro, and that frequency is 110.15. So it is already set. Next, we need to turn on our transponder here, which is off. It's required because we'll be entering Class B Bravo airspace, or we will be within 30 miles of the airspace as well. The simulator has a nav GPS selector switch. Right now we're going to use the GPS for navigation, so we'll change it from nav to GPS. And that concludes the before taxi checklist. So just to give you a lay of the land here, alright, so we're parked partly on the grass with a taxiway in front of us. We're going to take the taxiway to the right to the end of the runway, hold short at runway 25 to check for aircraft, and then take off to the southwest. Okay, so now we're ready to taxi to the end of the runway where we will do our magneto run-up. Before we go, we'll make a radio call. Central Jersey traffic, Skyhawk 614 Foxtrot Alpha on ramp 4 taxiing to runway 25, Central Jersey. Okay, we take off our parking brake. We need to apply plenty of power to break free of the grass. And now we will taxi over to runway 25. The sun is setting a little bit low now. We will move over to the side and do our run-up to check the magnetos. Okay, so we'll increase the RPM to 1700, and then we'll do our magneto test. So I apply throttle to 1700, keeping my feet hard on the brakes. Okay, we turn the ignition switch first to just the left magneto. Watch for a 50 RPM drop, and then the right magneto. Same thing, 50 RPM drop. So left, and here's a switch. 50 RPM. Back to both, right, both. Okay, so we're good. bring our throttle back to 1,000. This is a fuel injected airplane, so we did not have to do a carburetor heat check at that point. We're approaching the runway now.
Approaching runway 25.
That was an announcement from ForeFlight. So now we'll check for aircraft left and right, and then we'll announce our takeoff. Central Jersey Regional Skyhawk 614 Foxtrot Alpha taking off from runway 25, Central Jersey.
Entered runway 25, 3,200 feet remaining.
So it took us 16 minutes to get to the point of takeoff from a cold and dark airplane. Now we apply the throttle smoothly after we line up, and we apply sufficient right rudder to counteract the left turning tendencies of the airplane, keeping an eye on the oil pressure, and we will rotate at 55 knots. Okay, and we're up. And I will adjust the trim to relieve pressure on the yoke. So our airspeed is just under 80 knots, which is good. And our altitude is climbing. If you recall, we're at 86 feet. So we'll start our turn around 8 to 900 feet. That's that climbing right turn. Central Jersey Regional Skyhawk 614 Alpha Foxtrot Alpha departing the traffic pattern to the east, Central Jersey. Okay, I have my hand on the throttle, and we start a right climbing turn. We keep our eye on all the instruments, make sure the airspeed's okay. Turn coordinator to apply the right amount of rudder pressure. And we keep our eye on the altitude and also our heading. Okay, so now we're going east, and we've reached our altitude of 1,500. I'm going to put the overlay for our moving GPS map here. As we approach 115 knots, I'm going to reduce power and maintain 115 knots. All right. I will keep the landing lights on because they are required in the Hudson River corridor. So right now we're on the autopilot on heading mode with a heading I set of 96 degrees. I'm going to change the mode to GPS steering, and that will allow the autopilot to track this magenta line in the GTN 750. Now that we're in GPS steering mode, this is the VOR gauge. The vertical line is actually our desired track, and you can see the course is a little bit to the left of us. So the plane steered slightly left to intercept the course, and now is correcting once we meet it. And here in ForeFlight we can see we're going approximately east. The distance to the next waypoint, which is Elvey, is 12 nautical miles. The estimated time en route to our destination is 43 minutes. So from this point, going to the harbor and then northbound and coming back into landing is 43 minutes. With a distance of 83 nautical miles, we're at 1,500 feet, tracking 96 degrees magnetic, and I'll move the map away so we can see what's happening. One more thing. We are now inside Newark. This is Newark Airport. So we're inside the Newark Airport Class Bravo or Class B airspace. We're in the outer ring. As we approach this next ring, it may be a little hard to see, but we need to be below 1,500 feet to avoid entering that airspace. Right now we are at 1,500, so we will descend now to 1,200 feet to avoid busting the airspace. Okay, I decreased the throttle slightly as we descend. We have a message on the GTN 750. I'll just acknowledge it so it doesn't flash. Okay, we're at 1,200 feet. I'll apply the throttle. You can see we are maintaining 115 knots, more or less. There's a speed limit in the Hudson River corridor of 140 knots, and that is a higher speed than we can achieve in the Cessna. We also need to stay between 1,000 and 1,300 feet in the Hudson River corridor. We're going to, as I said, approach the Verrazzano Bridge. The towers for the Verrazzano are at 700 feet above ground, or above the water. So we need to be 500 feet above that, which is why I've selected 1,200 feet for the flight to and over the Verrazzano Bridge. Then once we pass that, we'll descend to 1,100 feet for the remainder of the tour of the Skyline. Okay, we have several different types of views available to us. This is the standard view, and this is us from the outside of the airplane. You can see we're approaching the ocean in front of us. I'm going to move the GPS over. And this is as if we're sitting right up front, in front of the prop, catching all the wind. So this is a great view. Also, here's a view of us going past a fixed point, and that gives us a sense of how fast we're going. So we're moving well along. looks like I closed the moving map, so now I'm going to have to reopen it. It'll just take a second. Okay. All right, we're back. Okay, our airspeed is 115 knots. Our desired track is 98 degrees, and our actual track is 98 degrees, so we are following that line. We're going to turn a few degrees once we hit this next waypoint of Elve in 0.4 nautical miles. And because we're on the GPS steering mode, the autopilot will turn the airplane automatically, which is what it is doing. We're banking to the left. Okay, let's go over the instruments. Okay, here we have a clock and a gauge that's indicating the voltage put out by the alternator of 24 volts.
Destination ATIS is 132.85.
So ForeFlight is suggesting we contact ATIS for Teterboro, but since we're not going there direct, we'll do that later. What we will do though is toggle over our frequency for the Skyline route to 123.05. So that is done. And I will set the frequency for Teterboro Tower in the standby now while we have time, which is 119.50. Okay. We also are going to take the airplane out of GPS steering mode and put it into heading mode. So this is the directional gyro, and it has what's called a heading bug, which is here, and I can move that bug to whatever direction I want the airplane to go once I set the autopilot in heading mode. It's not in heading mode now. So I'm going to set it to the heading we're going at now. And then on the autopilot, I'm going to take it off of GPS steering mode and put it on to heading mode. So you'll see it switch over. You can see it says HDG or heading. So the autopilot is controlling the heading set by our bug here, and it is controlling the altitude. And I have it set at 1,200 feet. This 1,200 is the transponder frequency that we set for VFR flight. Okay, so here's New York Bay, and here you can see the Verrazzano Bridge. Right now we're flying over Staten Island. The Verrazzano connects Staten Island to Brooklyn. So once we reach the Verrazzano, we're going to make that left turn and head towards New York City. Okay, so you can see New York City in the distance. Now, my simulator has 3 screens, so you're looking at the center screen, but I also have a left and right screen. So this is the Verrazzano Bridge. As we move closer to it, it's going to move onto my left screen, so I'll be able to see when we're alongside the bridge to make that left turn. Airspeed 115 knots, good. Altitude 1,200 feet, great. Our attitude indicator indicates we are level flight. Our heading is 95 degrees, and everything looks good. So now we're over water. I'll move our view a little bit to the left so you can see what's going on. When the left or south tower of the bridge crosses our strut, it'll be time to make that left turn. Getting close. Okay, so now we're going to turn to a heading of north. You can see the GPS is turning the entire map as we turn. The GPS is set with up being our direction of travel. Okay, so we're coming up to the Verrazzano Bridge. Now we'll get a great view of it with the sun low in the horizon on the left. And we need to do our reporting as we enter the Skyline route. So I'll do the first one. We need to include the aircraft type, current position, direction of flight, and altitude. So it is Cessna VZ 1,200 feet northbound. Okay, and now we're flying over the Verrazzano with Brooklyn on the right and Staten Island on the left. And the big towers of Manhattan are in the distance on the right. Our next reporting landmark will be the Statue of Liberty. For those of you who travel to Brooklyn, so this is the Belt Parkway here. Going out to the BQE. And there's the Statue of Liberty, which will be to the left of us as we pass it. I am keeping track of the instruments because my simulator has an instrument panel. You can see, though, our ground speed is 115 knots. And our current track is 24 degrees. Now, we're not on the GPS steering mode. In other words, we're not following the flight plan. Instead, we're following the right bank of the Hudson River. as we approach the Statue of Liberty here. Lady Liberty is greeting us. Okay, now we're passing it, so I'll make the second announcement. Cessna, Statue of Liberty, 1,200 feet northbound. Okay, now we're going to come down to 1,100 feet, as I said earlier. There's the Statue of Liberty in full view out the left window. Now we're passing the World Trade Center, and also on the lower left there's the old Colgate clock. That's another landmark. Let's see if we can see that. Right there. We have to announce at the Colgate clock. Cessna clock, 1,100 feet northbound. Okay. So you can see the World Trade Center is towering above us. New Jersey's on our left. Manhattan is on our right. And we can see the Empire State Building right there. With several of the new residential buildings that have been erected recently in New York City. Here's some. Our next landmark will be Intrepid Aircraft Carrier. It's on around Pier 46, or actually I'm not sure if it's 46. Anyway, this is it right here, and they erected a shelter on top of the space shuttle on its flight deck, which we can see, and behind it on the pier is a Concorde supersonic transport. And we can see the tail of it here. So we make our announcement. Cessna Intrepid, 1,100 feet northbound. All right. Intrepid is actually sitting on a pier around 46th Street. And the pier numbers increased by about 40. Ahead of us is the George Washington Bridge, which is our next reporting point. To the right is the lake in Central Park. There it is. I'm going to change the next segment of the GPS so that we can capture it. So if you recall, we're going to capture this segment from Dees to Nyack. So I have to activate the Nyack segment. Okay, so that is done. Now we can make our next radio call. Cessna GWB 1,100 feet northbound. We can see some traffic on the GWB. Not as bad as it has been at times. And on the left, we can see the Palisades on the left shore of the Hudson River. There's one more waypoint, and that's called the Alpine Tower, which is a radio transmitting tower that we're approaching. It will be on the left shore of New Jersey. Beautiful day for flying. This is the East River. We'll do a check of our instruments. Airspeed 115, good. Attitude indicator, normal. Altitude 1,100, good. The course is to our right, which we know we're not tracking. Instead, we're tracking the river. And our heading is now 30 degrees, and we're following the right shore of the Hudson River. Instrument gauges are in the, or engine gauges are in the green. So we're all good. Okay, here's the Alpine Tower. So we'll make our announcements as we pass it. Cessna Alpine Tower, 1,100 feet northbound. Okay, so that concludes the scenic part of the route. Now we have to contact Teterboro Tower. Before we do that, we have to listen to ATIS for Teterboro.
Teterboro information Delta. 2000 Zulu weather. Wind calm, visibility more than 10. Sky clear, temperature 13, dew point -16. Altimeter 2992. Arriving runway 19, departing runway 24. Advise on initial contact you have Delta.
Okay, so we have information Delta, and we also learned the altimeter setting is 29902. We have it already set at 29902. So we come to our radio, and we flip the frequencies to bring up Teterboro Tower, and we make our initial contact. Teterboro Tower, Skyhawk 614 Foxtrot Alpha, 10 miles northwest at 1,100 with Delta, inbound for approach and landing, Teterboro. And hopefully they answer. Skyhawk 614 Foxtrot Alpha, cleared for the approach and landing. Climb to 2,000 and turn left at Nyack. And we answer, Teterboro Tower, Skyhawk 614 Foxtrot Alpha, cleared for the approach and landing. Climb to 2,000, turn left at Nyack. Okay, we're clear for the approach and landing, so we need to climb to 2,000. I apply full power, and we start our climb to 2,000. Ahead of us is the Tappan Zee Bridge, and our left turn will be just after the Tappan Zee. We're climbing at a vertical speed of 800 feet per minute. It looks like there's no problem sustaining that today with the cool weather. I'm going to drop it down to 700. And I'm going to bring up our moving map as well so you can see it. Here we are, and as we approach this segment, we will make the left turn. So we're leveling off at 2,000 feet. Okay, I zoomed in on the iPad. We're right here. And it's also shown the same on the airplane GPS. And since we're heading north, they're both pointed in the same direction. I'm also going to change the for-flight segment, which now shows the segment to our right, to the segment from Dees to Nyack. Okay, so now we have two magenta lines, one in for-flight and one in the GPS. We're getting close to our left turn, and I'll start it now to a heading of 287. Okay. Now I'll take us out of the heading mode and put us back into GPS steering mode to follow the magenta line. And we're very close to it. The plane made one small dip to put us on that line. Okay, we're 2.8 nautical miles from the next waypoint, which is Nyack, at which point we will turn left to a heading of 216 degrees or so. Okay, left turn to 218 in 7 seconds. Restart our left bank. And the next segment is highlighted in magenta on both ForeFlight and the Garmin GTN 750. Okay, now we complete a pre-landing checklist by memory using the GUMPS acronym. So G for gas. We make sure the fuel valves are open, which they are. Undercarriage, well, this plane has fixed undercarriage, so that's okay. M is the mixture, full rich. It is full rich. P is a prop. This plane has a fixed prop, so nothing to do there. And S is seat belts, and for me also landing lights. So we're good. Now our airspeed is pretty high up there at 114 knots. As we approach the next waypoint, we're going to slow down, because once we start descending, we want to apply the first 10 degrees of flaps, and we have to be at or below 105 knots to apply the first 10 degrees of flaps. To apply this 20 and 30 degrees, we have to be below 85 knots. Okay, we're 3.2 nautical miles from the next waypoint. I'll reduce power. We want to be around 105 or 100 to 105 knots. I'm also going to set the heading bug to 196, which is a final approach heading. It'll make it easier to switch over to the approach. left turn in 9 seconds to 196, which is the runway heading. We can see the runway straight ahead of us. The lights are on already. Okay, now I'm going to switch us over to heading mode and switch from GPS to nav mode so we can pick up the ILS frequency, and our VOR comes live, so now we can select the approach mode. And everything is good. So the approach mode is on, and we have the GS or glide slope indication indicating the autopilot is ready to intercept the glide slope. So the vertical line means we're on course laterally from left to right. The glide slope line now became live, and as you can see, it's above the center line. If you imagine the aircraft is on the dotted line, the glide slope path is above us. So we will go level, we will continue to stay level until we intercept that glide path and then start our descent. Our airspeed is hovering at 100 knots. And you can see that glide slope line is coming down. And once that glide slope line hits the center line, we'll start our descent. We are 7.2 nautical miles from the runway, shown on ForeFlight. When we're 5 miles from the runway, we'll apply the first 10 degrees of flaps. As soon as we descend, we'll start reducing power. And here we go. Okay, we're descending at an angle of approximately 3 degrees, which translates to just under 500 feet per minute of descent, which you can see the vertical descent gauge is showing 486, which is just right. Airspeed is 100 knots. Distance from the airport is 5.3 miles. So as soon as that hits 5.0, we're going to put in the first 10 degrees of flaps. Here's a flaps gauge. And we can hear the flaps extending. The plane pitches up momentarily. Airspeed drops because of the drag from the flaps. And you can see we have 10 degrees of flaps coming in for our approach. Airspeed is 90, so we need to reduce power somewhat. We need to be below 85. That looks about right.
3 mile final runway 19.
Okay, 10 degrees more flaps. I think you heard them go on. Airspeed is now 75. We keep our eye on the airspeed all the time now. We're going to touch down at approximately 70 knots. We'll apply the last 10 degrees of flaps once we hit an altitude of 500 degrees. And there'll be an announcement. I'm sorry, I'm at 500 feet.
$500.
Okay, so now we apply the last 10 degrees of flaps. The autopilot appears to be putting us a little to the right of the center line, but we're going to leave it there. As we approach, we'll disconnect the autopilot and center the airplane. Okay, I just disconnected the autopilot. Okay, we do our flare. And we're down. Flaps up. We shut off the strobe. Here comes our turn off the runway onto the taxiway. Apply the brakes. A little touchy. Okay, we make our announcement as we cross Old Short Line. Teterboro Tower, Skyhawk 614 Foxtrot Alpha, clear of runway 19er, Teterboro. Now, Teterboro has 2 runways. So we need to cross the second runway in order to get to the terminal. The second runway is coming up.
Approaching runway 0624.
Teterboro Tower, Skyhawk 614 Foxtrot Alpha, holding short runway 6, Teterboro. Skyhawk 614 Foxtrot Alpha, clear across runway 6. Teterboro Tower, Skyhawk 614 Foxtrot Alpha, cleared across runway 6. Okay, we also are
Entered
looking.
runway 0624.
Okay. So we cross over one right runway. And as we cross the whole short line, we make our last announcement. Teterboro Tower, Skyhawk 614 Foxtrot Alpha. Clear runway 6, Teterboro. Okay, and that concludes our flight. That was a little over 1 hour from start to finish. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll see each other on another nice flight. So we're going to turn the airplane around, and before we leave, we're going to shut it off. Okay. So parking brake on. Okay, now we're going to shut off all the switches except the beacon. Leave the beacon on. And shut off the avionics master. And then we're going to pull out we're going to set the idle to 1000. And then we're going to pull out the mixture fully. And the airplane will stop. The engine will stop. And now we'll shut off the rest of the switches. And that concludes our flight. Well, thanks again, and I hope you enjoyed the flight.